Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP28 in Dubai. Ambitious, just together.
Okay, hello everyone, welcome. I'm delighted to see such a full house of people. And first of all, thank you very much to Germany for putting on this highlight, in my opinion, a highlight session, and bringing us all together on this really important topic of raising ambition in climate action through circular economy and resource efficiency, time to act being the most important point perhaps. So we'll be looking at science and research and economics behind the ideas of circular economy as a really important lever for climate action that's complementary to the all-important energy transition. And in doing so, we'll then also move on to how it can practically be implemented into NDCs so that we can finally push beyond only 27% of NDCs currently mentioning circular economy. And not only that, but we can push beyond it being mentioned to it being properly integrated in its full sense. So to start us off, I'm absolutely delighted that we're joined by two ministers here today. And I'd like to welcome Minister Lemke to the stage to say a few introductory remarks.
Yes, thank you, Miranda. Secretary Adalberto Malouf, Professor Jim Skier, Commissioner Janusz Potocznik, Cassie Flynn, Romeo Bertolini, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the German Pavilion and the live stream. I'm delighted that so many are joining us today. We want to talk about how we can harmonize our resource consumption with the Earth's planetary boundaries. We already addressed this issue at the last COP this time last year. A lot has happened since then. I'm looking forward to discussing the latest scientific findings and concrete solutions with you. We not only want to highlight the huge challenges we are facing, we also want to talk about concrete steps that we can take together. I would like to list 3 key questions to provide food for thought and guide us through today's event. These questions focus on scientific findings and the conclusions for climate policy and international cooperation. First, what does the science tell us about the link between global resource consumption and the triple planetary crisis on climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution? I'm delighted that we will hear shortly from 2 leading experts, Jim Skier and Janusz Potocznik. They will both present the last scientific findings. But one point I would like to address briefly now is that without greater resource efficiency and circular economy, our climate targets will be out of reach. More than half of all emissions are caused by the extraction and processing of natural resources. These emissions, which are the result of our mobility and consumption choices, cannot be reduced by an energy transition alone. They are part of products and infrastructure that we use every day. The International Resource Panel has documented this many times. Bearing this in mind, it is clear that resource efficiency and circular economy are crucial levers for tackling the climate crisis. The IPCC presented valuable findings in its last report cycle, for example, on the importance of circular economy for climate targets in industry, but also on the social dimension of climate change mitigation. I hope that these key findings can be further expanded in the 7th report cycle that is now beginning. Second, this leads me to the question, what do these findings mean for international climate policy? Resource efficiency and circular economy should actually be a firm fixture on climate action measures worldwide. There is clear scientific proof of the key role they play. But at the moment, only 27% of all NDCs contain an explicit reference to circular economy. So there is clearly an enormous gap. Or to put it in more positively, resource efficiency and circular economy still hold huge untapped potential for climate action. They can and must make a direct contribution to limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. But to achieve this, they need to be included in the NDCs and climate action plans of as many countries as possible. This brings me to the third and final question. What does this mean for international cooperation? International cooperation is fundamentally important to circular economy. There are some challenges that still have no solution. For example, how can the potential that circular economy holds for climate action be taken into account for calculation methods that are already used in climate policy? I'm delighted to say that the world's leading experts are already working hard on finding solutions. For example, we will hear from Cassie Flynn from UNDP later about a specific instrument that can help all countries incorporate circular economy into their NDCs. I am also looking forward to hearing about the experiences of our esteemed colleagues in Brazil. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite now you to listen to our event with an awareness of the problems we are facing, but also with a sense of hope. We can all contribute to finding solutions. I look forward to our cooperation in this issue. And now I want to invite my colleague from Brazil to give us a speech, Secretary Adalberto Maluf.
Thank you, Minister Steffi Lang, for the invitation. It's a great pleasure for me to be here representing the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Germany has been a great partner for Brazil for many, many years in many areas, especially on environment, climate change, to help us to create a green economy. So it's a great pleasure to be here. You know, Minister, when Lula was elected 20 years ago, Brazil still had huge poverty, hunger, social desiguity. At that time, he said that his priority was to make all Brazilians to have at least 3 meals per day. Brazil, for 15 years, under the first governments of Lula, grew up a lot. We left the map of hunger. And unfortunately, in 2016-17, we had a political, economical meltdown. We elected a far-right president that didn't care too much about environment, about the social desiguity. And nowadays, we are back to have more than 33 million Brazilians that are facing some type of a severe food insecurity. We have almost 100 million Brazilians that have food insecurity. But Brazil is one of the biggest producers of food in the world. We claim that we feed more than 1 billion people with our agriculture sector, but we waste so much. We estimate we waste something around 25% of everything we produce. Food waste, just by itself, represents probably around 10% of the emission in the world. It's almost the same as urban transportation, for example. So fighting inefficiencies and making our economy grow over these inefficiencies are one of the biggest priorities. And when President Lula got back now for his third term and invited Marina Silva, my Minister of Environment, to be the minister on the third time, she told me he asked her only one thing. Said, Marina, please put the waste pickers and the policies to increase recycling as the biggest priority of your minister. So when Marina invited me to be the national secretary and told me this, I said, okay, I got the message. And Brazil has been doing a lot historically on increasing recycling. So we got a map of everything that was happening, all the actions. We created a working plan. We recreated a national committee associated with the president for the social inclusion of waste pickers. We had decrease in the beginning of the year for recycling credits, for improving the rastreability of the invoices, to improve the management entities that take care of recycling. And as the recycling agenda was moving, we realized that we were only taking care after people consume and threw out. We were still living this linear economy that we were producing, using, sometimes single use, and throwing out. So our priority was not only fighting and improving recycling and the social inclusion of the 1 million waste pickers that Brazil have, but also thinking about the beginning of the production and the circular economy. So we start to re-engage with the industry, with the agriculture sector, with the finance sector, to think about, since the eco-design, the reuse. For example, we just opened some public calls now for 3 new decrees that we are moving. The plastic decree, to fight pollution of plastic. For the first time, we're going to have mandatory targets of recyclable plastic in the production of new plastic. 25% of content of recyclable plastic in the new production of plastic. We're going to have targets for reuse of plastic. We are doing this with paper, with metals, with all of them. And having this legislation that until now, they were all voluntary agreements. So you had good companies there, leaders were trying to do, but not even 1/3 of the companies were in the voluntary agreements. So we are shifting all the voluntary agreements to bills, legislations that everybody has to pay. Importers, brands that sell their own products, and everything, and everybody else. And with these legislations, we realized that it was closer for us to create a circular economy policy. So we got a partnership with UNEP. We got a partnership with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and thank you very much, because your team in Brazil has been helping me a lot, to all of us, to understand this. So we just created the first draft of our circular economy strategy. We showed to some mayors and governors. In the beginning of next year, from February to June, we are going to engage with civil society to try to improve. So hopefully, by the middle of next year, we are going to have a circular economy in place. And we don't want to talk only about the industry. We don't want to only talk about consumers and after consumption, but we want to engage all the sectors, including and especially agriculture sector, food waste, commerce, and finance. Brazil was able to reduce 63% deforestation from January to November. 63%. And this only happened, well, first because we had our partners like Germany, Norway, and others helping with the Amazon Fund, so at least we had budget and money to do things. The last government didn't leave too much budget on this area. But beside the budget and the support, we had the finance area coming together. So now, areas with deforestation are prohibited to get funding from official banks in Brazil. And that made a huge shift. So involving all the sectors to create this circular economy, wide open. Our NDC is a wide open NDC. We are finishing now the creation of 8 mitigation plans. 14 adaptation plans. Brazil is suffering so much from extreme weather events. I don't know how much we're following. Well, all the world is facing this, but Brazil right now, the Amazon region, is having the worst drought in the history. Since we start to measure 120 years ago, it's the largest. But in the beginning of the year, it was all flooded. So it's even impossible now for us to move. And as we start our presidency of the G20, we were able to convince our colleagues at the Foreign Affairs in one of the 4 priorities, adaptation, ocean, nature-based solution, payment for environmental service, and the 4th area of our work and priority of the G20 will be waste management and circular economy. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here, to listen, to learn a little bit more, and be with all these partners that have been helping us so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adalberto, and for bringing it to life, making it real, situating it in a citizenship scenario. So before we go further and hear a bit more about the practical implementation side, I'm absolutely thrilled that we've got the scientific side joining us first. So Jim, would you come and join us? Jim is the new co-chair of, IPCC chair, and will be leading the work on the 7th assessment cycle. And hopefully, miraculously, Yanis is going to pop up, there we go, co-chair of the International Resource Panel. Hello, both. So both of your organizations are producing absolutely key reports when it comes to the science-based research and where circular economy has the potential to fit in even more strongly. Yanis, you're currently in the final stages of developing GROW 2024, so the Global Resource Outlook that will be published next year. Could you give us a bit of insight into what your findings are in the Global Resource Outlook and what reflections that gives you on circular economy, resource efficiency, and climate action?
Sure, Miranda. Dear ministers, dear Jim, dear all, good day to all of you from Brussels. It's a pleasure being with you, even if only remotely. This time last year, as mentioned by Minister Lemke at COP27, it was a pleasure to share the stage with friends represented here again today at this event. We discussed the resource-climate nexus and the science of IPCC and IRP, and reconvening today, we have an opportunity indeed to reflect on latest developments, but most importantly, to look at the essential solutions of the future and how to implement them. Last year, we also welcomed some encouraging commitments, especially the Berlin Roadmap commitment to leverage the full power of resource solutions in climate and biodiversity plans. And by the way, it was really great to hear from a Brazilian colleague the shift in their policy approach. It's very much welcomed. Since then, in the IRP, we have finalized our Global Resource Outlook 2024, GROW 24 in short, as you mentioned, to be published early the next year. The IPCC is embarking on its 7th assessment cycle with Jim as chair, and several UN bodies have come together to launch the toolbox on implementing circular economy in NDCs, which are all encouraging developments. The title of this event says it all, time to act. Unfortunately, I'm in policy making for quite some time, and this is not the first time we are bold with our words. But speed and scale of changes needed are unfortunately not yet on our side. GROW 24 shows huge potential of resource solutions for climate and other environmental crises, since all are connected. Extraction and processing of materials, everything we extract from the earth, are driving 55% of climate impacts, over 90% of land-related biodiversity loss and water stress, and around 40% of health-related pollution impacts. All unfortunately see an increasing trend since our last global assessment in 2019. As you know, the wealthiest benefit most from resource use and are also most responsible for the most environmental impacts. Meanwhile, many low-income countries still do not consume enough material to meet basic human needs. Over 1/3 of countries globally do not have their basic nutritional needs met. 40% do not have adequate access to energy, and nearly 80% do not meet the threshold for overall life satisfaction. Dear friends, our consumption and production patterns designed by industrialized world are wasteful and unjust. If we do not change them, we will face increasingly severe environmental impacts while not having basic human needs met. In last 2 decades, global material footprint has increased for around 60%, mainly due to the affluence, that's economic growth, but also due to the population growth. Technology has played a modest positive role. But material footprint drivers vary a lot when we analyze them across global regions. In Europe and North America, material footprint did not increase. The economic and population growth was neutralized by technology contribution. This would be, of course, great news if per capita material footprint level in both regions would not be the highest and still much too high. In West Asia and Africa, the major driver was population growth, while in Asia and Pacific and in Eastern Europe, Caucasus, and Central Asia, it was the affluence, the economic growth. Interesting figures telling us a lot about different developments and also different challenges we actually face. But there is another way for all. We should not accept that meeting human needs should be resource intensive and stop stimulating extraction-based economic success, but rather reward responsible, innovative, creative ways of meeting human needs. Resource solutions for climate can be very effective and give people decent quality of life at the same time. It's all about optimizing delivery of human needs, especially in the most resource-intensive systems of our built environments, mobility and nutrition. If we optimize them, modeling in our incoming report shows that we can mitigate growth in material use by 30% by 2060 compared to continuing with current trends, leading to necessary absolute reductions in emissions and in energy demand, all while raising our well-being. This aligns well with IPCC work on demand-side change in key systems, the work led by Jim in Working Group 3 on mitigation. Both panels are thus sending a strong message to high-consuming countries. You need to absolutely decouple your resource use from well-being. This message would be even more powerful if coming to policymakers from unified scientific community. We are all aware that different governance systems exist for different global science policy interfaces. But France' situation is simply too serious that this argument would be still convincing. It is about science. It is about our clear and united messages which should be considered seriously by policy makers, giving no ground for excuses and for different focus or interpretations. It should be only about how and about concrete solutions. Yes, it should be in line with the title of today's event, Time to Act. IRP would welcome the opportunity to work more closely with IPCC and other panels. I found the clear alignment of argumentation with Jim and his team very encouraging, and we stand ready for opportunities to discuss synergies between the two agendas and explore the most effective formats for sending our joint message to the world. As for the next steps, we would only need to understand better how best science can support implementation of solutions, which we've both clearly identified, to figure out the gaps, the barriers, why seemingly clear solutions haven't been implemented already. I would really welcome any suggestions from the next part of today's event on how science could actually help identify and, of course, remove these gaps and barriers. To conclude, dear friends, today in the morning session, I have discussed the importance of climate and security nexus in an event organized by European Commission. It was very early, believe me, at least for us in Europe. Access to and use of natural resources have been in the human history always closely related to the level of well-being achieved by nations, but also to stability, to security, conflicts. The whole history of, let me call it, the colonialization of nature is central also to fairness and equity. Changing our relationship with the rest of nature, since we are part of it, is ultimately an economic, equity, and security imperative to strengthen collective resilience. This relationship is not stable nor balanced, and it will be resolved either with immediate collective action, based on wisdom and cooperation, or in a hard and painful way. This is ultimately what our sustainability efforts are really all about. Let me repeat, the future will be green or there will be no future. Thank you for your attention, and back to you, Miranda.
Thank you, Yanis, and I'm looking forward to the full report coming out next year. Before we maybe explore a little bit of some of the things you were saying about collaboration with the IPCC, Jim, there's a bit of circular economy, or maybe even you would say more than a little bit in AR6, but I'd love to hear your reflections on how it's fitting into the IPCC's work at the moment and opportunities to take it forward.
Yeah.
Oh. If you got one, steal the next one. Yeah. Should be working.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Miranda. And I was just saying to you before we started, I've been here nearly 2 weeks, and as the time goes on, my notes get shorter and my remarks get more improvised. So let me try to give some structure to this. I'll do, first of all, how we treated resource efficiency in the 6th assessment cycle. Then I'll go on to think about some of the research needs at the boundary between the International Resources Panel and ourselves. And finally, a bit about mechanisms for collaborating. So in terms of the way we treated circular economy and resource efficiency in AR6, it appeared in a number of chapters. And I think Yanis has actually already mentioned one of them, that we had a new chapter on behaviour and consumption, in which we thought about the way that human needs for basic services like nutrition, mobility, and also shelter could be met, and to think about how that could be done effectively. And the authors on that chapter effectively used an avoid, shift, improve framework. And the resource efficiency really fell within the improvement side of that. And there were many instances within that chapter of how these services could be delivered in both more resource efficient but also lower carbon ways. And I think the big conclusion was that through demand side measures you could actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions by between 40 and 70% by 2050 if you took these demand side measures. There was also treatment of resource efficiency in the chapters on urban settlements and buildings, and in particular the issue of embodied carbon in the built environment and how you actually dealt with that through design and planning. So, and that really touched on the shelter kind of basic human need. It's worthwhile saying a lot of this was qualitative in nature, which is something that I'm actually going to come on to. Probably the most comprehensive treatment was in our industry chapter, where they gave a lot of attention to resource efficiency, including through product design, get lighter products, thinking about design, longer life, reusability, repairability, ease of high quality recycling. Also thinking about manufacturing and fabrication processes, which would use materials and energy more efficiently. And then, as our Brazilian colleague has already mentioned, the question of recovery materials at end of life, improved recycling processes. So that was a fairly comprehensive coverage. That chapter also dipped the toe in terms of quantification, because it did cover a scenario, the low energy demand scenario, in which global material output fell by 20% by 2050, rather than growing, with about 1/3 of that due to dematerialization and 2/3 due to material efficiency. So there was some quantification there. It also covered an EU study which reckoned that emissions from the basic material sectors like steel, cement, chemicals could be about halved by 2050 through materials efficiency approaches. So this was a chapter that did it fairly thoroughly. I might also mention our land use chapter didn't cover this so much in the main report, but we had a previous report on climate change and land, a special report in the cycle, which touched on issues of food loss and food waste. Basically, probably we lose about 25% between the field and the people's actual consumption of food. It's really, really important to pick that up. So in terms of research needs at the boundary between the International Resources Panel and ourselves, all of the topics I've mentioned need further incremental treatment. But I think one of the biggest gaps, and it might help actually with including resource efficiency with NDCs, is to get quantification of the potential for resource efficiency. And just to say, if we can't count it, it's very difficult to put it into NDCs, and I think that's a big challenge. And just to say, there is a bit of a problem here, because IPCC, we tend to divide up emissions horizontally by sector. But to consider resource efficiency and circular economy, we need to think vertically along supply chains. And there is a real, I think, a need to try and reconcile these two conceptualizations if we're going to get that quantification moving. And I know our colleagues in the modelling world have actually started to give some consideration as to how these more vertical approaches could be developed. I think, again, in the sort of the more qualitative side, I think it's very important to do ex post policy evaluation to understand what works. If there are good case studies, good examples around the world, let's try to learn lessons from them, taking account of the fact that local specificities and national circumstances do matter, but we may be able to learn some important lessons. And one other thing that I would flag at the boundary is the question of critical materials, especially within the revolution on renewable energy and energy storage. We are going to make much bigger use of more exotic materials, which bring big challenges in terms of just transition supply chains. And many of the other issues we've already applied, like recycling, for example, are going to be important in that area as well. And as I understand it, there is a report that IRP is doing in critical materials as well, in which we will take a big interest. Now, finally, on mechanisms for collaborating with each other, and sometimes this does seem like a little bit of an uphill struggle, because we all have our principles and procedures that actually stand in the way of collaboration in some respects. IPCC has no device at the moment for producing common reports. And IRP is international and we are intergovernmental. It doesn't sound very important, but when you get to the practicalities, I think it actually is. So I think some of the things that we can talk about are sort of softer means of collaborating. There have already been discussions across all of the UNEP assessments about, say, a common glossary of terms. And when we got a common glossary across all three IPCC working groups, some of the most animated scientific discussions took place about how to define terms. And if we talk the same language, it's important. We could think about common scenarios that are used across the different assessments, even if we conduct our assessments separately. And of course, we still conduct workshops together. That is a very obvious mechanism. And of course, I mean, just finally, I think there's the question that we have common authors across different assessments. So there is communication. We can make sure that we review each other's reports thoroughly. So even if we are not at the stage of producing joint reports, I think there's much that can be done. And I think Yannis and I have already started to open up these discussions. And I think we share a common passion for joining up across different lines of inquiry. So I look forward to much more collaboration with Yannis, and hopefully we can be in the same room at the same time at one time, Yannis. We've met many ways like this. It would be good to advance the discussion in that way.
Great. Thank you very much. There was a moment when you were running through the figures where I thought, oh gosh, we're really in trouble. But then lots of optimism on how we can take this forward and go a bit deeper. Yannis, you heard there from Jim some ideas of how collaboration might work. I was particularly interested in the quantification focus and wondered whether IRP, because you've done reports on circular economy, they're very similar to our reports at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, about 45%, 50% of emissions coming from production and consumption. Do you have any reflections to what Jim was saying about thinking about the quantification along supply chains rather than purely sector by sector? Is that something that the IRP has worked with so far?
By the way, even if we would not have figures, we would know that we are in trouble. So yeah, there is absolutely a kind of quite strong convergence on the need to accompany supply with the demand side solutions and to focus on systemic solutions. So the thing which was mentioned by Jim and which is actually essence of your question is indeed the critical part. So how basically to connect these two concepts, the concept which is linked to sectors, how actually our economies are organized, how our governments are organized, but on the other hand, how to link that to the human needs, to systems, and how to connect those things. I sincerely hope that some help will come from the incoming global resource outlook, but it's not an easy question. It's certainly it's clear what Jim was saying, that a lot of work in the future will have to be focused on that, so that we would have even stronger matrix for measuring everything, and that we would have work also on more detailing of resource implications of agreed climate goals and solutions. And I firmly believe that this is pretty much the area where our attention in the future will need to go.
Yeah, thank you. And I was on a panel yesterday about circular economy in food, which I think is about the only sector that's discussed at COP as a system, food system or agri-food system. Otherwise, it's cement, steel, aluminium. So maybe there's something that we can learn from. You said you had a special report on land use that came out. Maybe there's something we can learn from that side.
Yeah. In fact, the special report on climate change and land was the first IPCC report that had ever looked at the food system as a whole, as opposed to looking at agriculture and the supply side of the food system. I think we need to be very careful when we're talking about systems, because as I've come here, I've heard that urban systems account for 70% of emissions, the food system counts for a third, and the energy system counts for 30 or 40%. Some double counting is going along somewhere, which illustrates the need for actually being careful about the numbers and what we actually mean.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm delighted that you both are probably going to meet in person, and that there'll be more collaboration happening between the two organizations. We'll also stand ready to help where we can. I want to bring in a bit more of the practical experience and the toolbox that's been developed by the 3 UN organizations. So can I welcome Cassie Flynn, Global Director of Climate Change from UNDP, to the stage, Romeo Bertolini, who is the Deputy Director at Country Engagement at the NDC Partnership, and National Secretary Malouf, would you join us again as well? Thank you. Cassie, I just alluded to the fact that a toolbox has been developed. So I have to start with a question asking you to share with us what the toolbox is and how you've developed it and how you see it being used.
Thank you so much, and it's such a pleasure to be here, and to these conversations I think are coming at such a critical time during this COP. We've had so many big picture declarations. Now we know in the negotiating rooms there's a lot of details to be sorted out, and I think we are really touching upon so many of the issues that we're talking about here in terms of circular economy and the power of circular economy in the context of climate action, and certainly on NDCs. This toolbox, it was so interesting to hear the gaps that were mentioned about really sort of assessing these embodied emissions across the value chain, and that is exactly what this toolbox is meant to do. UNEP, UNDP, UNFCCC, One Planet Network, we are together in this and really trying to pool all of our expertise to create a very practical, interactive guide to help countries to be able to assess, to be able to prioritize, to be able to implement, and to be able to track these circular economy interventions across NDCs and across climate action in the economy. This is meant to be, and I think if it's possible to click to, there's a QR code in a slide here, and please do. I think there's a different QR code. There we go. Many QR codes, and you can see here that this is where you can get a sense for this toolbox in of itself, and you can see it's meant to be very responsive to the countries that we have been working with. UNDP has a presence on the ground in over 170 countries and territories, and we've really tried to embed responses to the concerns that countries are bringing forward, and to be able to have a very practical application of them. So understanding how you build circularity into NDCs, but then also the practical application in two sectors that we've heard a lot about, food systems and buildings and materials and construction. So really being able to sort of dive into some of these, and so happy to hear from IPCC and János on the ability for this to be very practical in where we know the opportunities are, because if we can capture those opportunities, we can move the needle on this, and I think there's a lot of possibility here. So thank you.
Yeah, great. Let me turn to Romeo, because your organization, NDC Partnerships, is all about helping countries with NDCs, the implementation, the development. So what opportunities do you see for circular economy featuring in the work that you do with countries?
Very much, and first of all, of course, for having me here, and it's very good to hear all these examples. It's also good to hear that UNDP, once again, with UNEP, CCC, and others are cooperating on something. And the cooperation, the integration part is very important for us. You know that most of the present people are a member of the NDC partnership. We have more than 200 members now, and we work on really trying to make sure that NDCs are unpacked into something concrete, into something that is going towards an investment plan that can be taken up not only by the environmental ministries, of course, and are reported here in this context, but are done in a concrete manner in the various sector ministries, sub-national level, and so forth. And this is where, of course, a lot of the circular economy and also the waste management sector is coming in order to reduce the emissions and make sure that, you know, we also capture the low-hanging fruits. It's not always that attractive to talk about these kind of things than about the EVs and stuff like that. So that's one thing. And how we work and very closely, obviously, with Germany, with UNDP, the multilateral banks, the IKI programs, and so forth, is to make sure that countries are in a position to organize this support efficiently. And this is something, and I may quote a colleague from Sierra Leone yesterday in a high-level panel who said, like, you are all coming, you development partners are all coming with your own ideas, you're coming with your own systems, you're coming with your own concepts, and we are so stretched on the country level. We don't have the capacity, we don't have the time even to deal with all this. And this is probably even for a great and big country like Brazil sometimes, you're also chased by so many international partners probably. And I think organizing this and making the point for putting the right priorities at the right time, working around country ownership, around systems, and a planning process that is nationally accepted across the board and for the whole of governments, but also making the point for international support being bundled and collectively applied on the ground. This is exactly what we do. And for the new round of NDCs, the updates, this is one thing that is extremely important. And we have already, from the last cycle of the NDCs, insights from Zimbabwe, from Panama and other countries where circular economy, waste management, resource efficiency is playing a great role and helps mitigation big time. So this is an invitation for collaboration, basically. Thank you so much.
Yeah, great. Cassie, I'm going to come back to you in a minute because I think you've been starting to pilot the toolbox with various countries, so have country experience. But Adalberto, you were talking about the G20 next year, which you have the presidency, and then COP30 will be in Brazil as well, and that's when the next NDC cycle will come through. You mentioned that you're looking at the downstream, so the waste management, improving that, the upstream, looking at reuse. You have a national circular economy strategy in development. How are you linking that to climate with a view to thinking about COP30 in the next NDC cycle? Is the climate connection, is it easy for you to make, or are there certain things that you need more support on to make the climate connection stronger?
Well, Miranda, I think
every minister in Brazil has been doing their own job by itself. This is one of the things that since the beginning, Minister Marina has set as a priority to have environment, climate change, green economy, very transversal at all the ministers. So on the recreation of the government, now 19 ministers have environment, climate change as their action. So after evaluating and monitoring a little bit of the results of the projects that were done with cities in the past, we decided to expand a program that was only the Ministry of Environment, which was called Sustainable Cities. Well, you can put everything there, as you imagine. But we made a partnership with the Minister of Cities, the Ministry of Science and Technology. Actually, even GIZ, the German Cooperation Agency, helped us a little bit on that. And these three ministers, we created an integrated program called Green Resilient Cities. And this program aims to be like an umbrella partnership where we understand better everything that we are doing with cities, with subnational governments and governments. So we divided in different areas, like adaptation, green areas, solution-based, natural-based solution, low-carbon technology, sustainable mobility. And with this umbrella program, we are asking all the international partners, and we did a debate here on the first week of COP with World Resource Institute, ITDP, ICLEI, GIZ, like all the partners, UNEP, all the partners that help us so that we can coordinate a little bit better. Our goal now is to start doing science-based public policies, because we were doing a lot of things, but we couldn't measure very well. We didn't know if it was on the right direction or not. So that's what we decided to do. First, we did this framework in-house. We recreated a three-party commission, where the national level, state, and cities. On our national environment board, we also opened up and expanded to civil society, mayors and governors to have the same type. And our goal is to use the G20 presidency, especially now that we were able to make the point inside the government to have as the fourth pillars, waste management and circular economy, that this is going to be a space for us to debate solutions. The G20 presidency of Brazil, you are not going to see any declarations, any new agreements, any new announcements. No, we're going to have technical groups debating cost and effectiveness of solutions for circular economy, for recycling, for composting, because the demand is there. See, the first RFP we did, our budget was very small. It's still the budget that came from the former government. And because Marina asked us, look, it needs to be integrated solutions. So we did an RFP for mayors with funding for composting with urban agriculture. In the case of Brazil, almost 90% of the methane emission comes from agriculture, livestock, and waste. Waste by itself is only 20%. We all know methane is maybe 40% of the greenhouse gases on the short term, so it's the easiest way for us to reduce. So we did this RFP in 2 weeks, very small budget, like 10 million reais. $2 million. We thought not that many people would come. And there were hundreds of cities applying for the money. So there is demand. And we have 2,700 open dumps. So if I don't help them to do something with the composting and give it to urban agriculture, this waste is going to go to the illegal dumps, the open dumps, which the methane is going to be there. So climate change, air quality, and social inclusion for us is an integrated approach. So that's why we plan there, and especially on BRICS, because Brazil is also going to be the president of BRICS. So we have G20, BRICS, well, we had Mercosur, as we move with a possible agreement with the European Union. And then later we have COP30 presidency. So we want in these international forums to be a place where we can set up these potential solutions to tackle what we need to do, because climate change is here. And hopefully we are going to use these presidencies to leverage the debate so that we can move faster in the solutions we want.
Great, thank you. And yeah, thank you for making that connection between the waste management side and methane, and that's where the circular economy solutions can come in. And I'm sure Yannis is delighted to hear that it won't be about declarations, but it will be about time to act in the G20 next year, which is great. Cassie, yes, so you've been piloting the toolbox. So what's some of the feedback that where have you been piloting it, and what's some of the feedback you've been receiving?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think that, you know, what you just said is so exciting, because it means, again, sort of going from the what to the how and being able to really demonstrate this action. And I think, too, this is also, in many ways, a global solidarity on this, that North and South can learn from each other as these economies are starting to pivot. We have piloted this toolbox in Ecuador, Vietnam, and Zimbabwe. We've taken three regions and really tried to do a deep dive across this. And we have really seen an immense amount of progress on the ground, and we know that there are gaps and challenges as we move ahead. And one of the biggest is really about assessing and reporting these embodied emissions across the value chain. How do we do this across the entirety of the value chain? How do we report on these? And we've heard so much about this, and being able to have the right research and the right science, and really being able to partner closely with IPCC and IRP about what this looks like, because we have to avoid double counting. We have to make sure that we are giving a very real assessment of how these interventions are making an impact and how we can account for them and where they go. How do we report on this, especially within this context? I mean, you know, we have the enhanced transparency framework. What does that look like to report into a global framework, and how do we do this? And I think this is an immense opportunity when we talk about a practical intervention that I think can have enormous dividends. It's answering questions like that help really guide the way. A few other needs that we have seen from this application of the toolbox is certainly on the issue of finance. How do we ensure that these interventions can be financed at scale, that these interventions are embedded across the economy in a very, very cross-sectoral way? And this, of course, both of these also require data. How do you collect data? How do you manage it? How do you synthesize it? How do you report on this data in a way that is efficient? And some countries we've seen have immense systems that have been set up that over decades of time to be able to have these access to the right evidence and the right information. And other countries are just at the very beginning. Another piece as well is also on capacities. This is really, in many ways, a frontier, and I think that's why I'm so inspired by Brazil, is to, when the conversation starts about, as you were saying, sort of about recycling and about waste, how do you start to look at this in a holistic way? How do you start to look at this from the beginning? And to be able to have sort of the right capacities and the right institutional frameworks and the right ability to connect those dots across ministries and across government can open up an immense array of opportunities that are ripe for the taking if we can just get this right. So we're really looking forward to continuing the close collaboration with everyone here and really being able to chart sort of these new frontiers in this. And we've kind of had daydreams while we've been here about, can we start having further sort of high-level conversations on circular economy in the context certainly of NDCs. And this has been a really fantastic conversation, and huge thanks to everyone being involved. So.
Great. I mean, it definitely seems that collaboration between the organizations that are involved in doing it, but also on the scientific side, everyone's asking for it, so I hope it can go forward. Jim, did you want to reflect on something that Cassie was saying?
You could see my brain beginning to work a little there, and this is thinking on my feet a little. But you can see from the initial presentation I did how we have almost been siloed in our approaches as well. We did it in that behaviour and consumption chapter. We did it in industry. We did it in the buildings chapter. And I think it's an important question when we think about scoping the next set of IPCC reports. How do we treat this question of sectors versus systems? And on whether we take common themes when we actually think about this. So is there a resource efficiency theme that cuts across the different chapters? And I think it's worthwhile saying, I mean, we are giving much harder thought about how we do this. We're thinking about how the working groups interact with each other. And one possibility is that when we come to sectors, is that we don't separate them into individual working group reports, but have common products, sectorally based, for example, that cut across impacts and adaptation and mitigation. That's particularly true in terms of agriculture and land use issues where you could do that, leaving space in the main reports for more cross-cutting thematic considerations. So we haven't scoped it out yet. I'm thinking entirely off the top of my head, rather prompted by the discussion here, but I think there are other ways in which we could organise our assessments to advance these agendas.
Great. And Yanis, I wondered if you wanted, exactly, I thought you might want to reflect. Do come in.
Sure. Thank you, Miranda. A few points, because this discussion is really intriguing and very good. The first point which I would like to do, the rising recognition of resource solutions, it's a fact, and it's welcomed. I see that also from how much IRP is actually integrated in this COP comparing to before. And Germany was championing that for quite some time, and it deserves praise for the vision and also for the leadership. But if we would like to have most effective strategies, my recipe would be, first, those who are systemic in nature, so avoiding silo logic and approach. I will explain later why. Second, leading to complementing supply with the demand side, so increasing the solution potential and via that also addressing the equity dimension. And third, addressing the core drivers and pressures. So natural resource management is a must, and signals sent to producers and consumers. Why these systemic solutions? And I agree that we have to avoid some double counting, but actually individually we are not double counting, but each of us has a bit different optic from which we count and measure, and then we share data, and it sounds like double counting. So this needs definitely better alignment. But why this systemic approach is so important and necessary? Because it's actually the real way how to incentivize the cross-sector innovation and to support the shift to a more future-fit business models, leading to the reduction of energy and resource use and to deliver multiple co-benefits for people and planet. So we have to talk about mobility, not about car. Because if you talk about car, you know that your logic is limited to certain solutions which are linked to the car, but this will not bring us far enough. So we should, on the other hand, one really important thing is, we should stop stimulating extraction-based economic success. If, according to IMF, fossil fuel-related state subsidies were the highest last year. My dear friends, we are at COP28, we are not at COP1. So this is even hard to believe. So, and my last point would be actually also to something which the colleagues mentioned. This is related to the governance of the resource area. As you know, we don't have any kind of specific convention on resource management, international convention. Many international initiatives are existing also, some mentioned by the colleagues sitting around the panel. Then we have GATSERE, we have UNEP, Sustainable Consumption and Production initiatives, two more practical ones like World Circular Economy Forum, where also Ellen MacArthur Foundation is very deeply involved. But we need a kind of more organized, deeper, stronger cooperation and coordination. Everybody is agreeing that we need to have better agreements about terminology used, common understanding, organization of data, measurement, setting joint standards. And in the IRP, we see a need for something which would play a kind of that role, something similar like we have in energy area, like international resource energy or something like that. But there is quite a desperate need that we strengthen the international governance.
Yeah, so governance is something that we need to look at. But I'm glad also that you mentioned the economic innovation side to this as well. That if you take a systems approach and you actually change the question, at COP often the discussion actually is about cars and then you default to an electric vehicle discussion. But as you say, if you're looking at the system and you were mentioning cities, how are cities designed in the first place? Where are things put? Do you need a vehicle to be able to access them? Then you're actually opening up not just a new way of behaving, but also it will change how production works, and also it will lead to new products being put on the market. And hopefully in that new scenario, anything you put on the market has a subsequent flow to go to, because that's the problem at the moment, that you can put anything on the market and nobody really has to worry about who picks up the rest, which is why you end up with open waste burning and so on. In our work at the Anna MacArthur Foundation, I can also echo that point about the data question. I think in terms of the emissions, in some ways, is simpler, and once you start changing the products into a loop form, you lose a very obvious beginning and finish, which then makes it quite difficult to work with some of the standard accounting methods. So I think that definitely is an area to look at. And yeah, capacity building as well was mentioned. That also resonated with me, and the need for, well, actually, sounds like Brazil's doing really well on joined up cross-government approach, so maybe we can learn something from that. I wanted to ask, were there, like taking the toolbox forward, Cassie, do you have any sense of what I mean, I know it's very early, it's only just been launched, it's only in pilot phase, but do you have a sense of how it will develop? Is it static, or will you be, as the learnings from the collaboration come through, will the toolbox be able to take some of that on?
Absolutely. It is meant to be a sort of living collaboration and a living tool. And so as we learn more, as we have more research, as we have more methodologies, as we have more expertise, this is meant to be embedded within it. As I mentioned, we have started with the practical application, both on sort of food systems and on building and construction materials. This will be expanded to other sectors and to really start to think about how this, the practical application across some of these key areas can be used. And then certainly being able to provide opportunities where countries can get together and learn from each other about these processes. We've had a series of workshops associated with this toolbox, a series of that have enabled some conversations so that we can have real-time learning and real-time feedback to be able to continue to improve it. We very much consider this the start of the journey of this toolbox. It's been years in the making, but it's an exciting moment, and I think that as it evolves, hopefully it will continue to be useful and expand as the needs across countries expand, and as we learn more as this evolves.
Yeah. And is that something that the NDC partnership, I mean, I don't know if you're going to do some of these workshops together, but presumably you have experience in bringing countries together and learning from each other.
We do more together than you may probably imagine with Cassie, and there's a lot of commitment also from the governments that fund us as a secretariat, as a matchmaker, as a catalyst, but also fund these kind of tools. And in fact, if I'm not wrong here, and correct me, Casey, if that's the case, a lot of this Zimbabwe case study was basically done on the request of the Zimbabwean government to us, and then it evolved out of this work. And this is something that is our role, and it sounds easy, and it sounds like, we catalyze, we matchmake, and it's pretty abstract, but when you see this happening on the ground and evolving on the ground, and when you see then tools like this toolbox are coming out of it, and we see also increasingly sectors quality of NDCs enhancing, bringing in more of this kind of work is really mind-blowing, and it's fun on a daily basis. And when you see how you can connect the dots, but for that again, ownership on the country level, the national circumstances in all respects are extremely important. We have a partnership and investment plan unpacked in Zambia worth 17 billion US dollars, and this goes on to 2030. There's a lot of cities, a lot of resilience, waste management is there, and this is an invitation, all of those are an invitation where we distribute this to our 200 members to take this up and do something concrete, because of course the toolbox is something nice and an NDC is something nice, but if it doesn't really hit the economy, hit the people at the end of the day, we will not really see something, right? And this is a bit what I see also in the COPs in the last years, where we see, a lot of movement and a lot of excitement. That's why this circus, if you want, and this show is so big in the meantime, because you brought in so many other people, practitioners, and not only the negotiators, basically.
Yeah. Jim, are you wanting to come in?
Slightly different topic.
Okay, let me just ask one follow-up question. How much does the work or the outcomes of the IPCC, how does that feed into the NDC development, like the workshops that you're running? Like, is there for example, AR6, how does that inform the countries that you're working with? Because the next NDC delivery line is not that far away.
No. And this is then what we're going to do is we're going to try to organize, and again with the UNDPs and the World Banks and the countries that support us, we try to organize a kind of this open discussion on the country level, South-South, in the context of the UNFCCC Climate Weeks. We've done this and make sure that these kind of results are coming in. But obviously the mandate that we also have is not only on the hardcore kind of measurement and so forth, but it's really bringing in the whole of economy and making things happen. And also not only when it comes to the NDCs, but we are running a call right now for our members to support also the long-term strategies and the links to the NDCs, and obviously based on the findings and the outcomes of the GST.
Okay, great. Jim, where do you want to take us?
Change of direction. I was just going to say there's going to be a new kid on the block quite soon, because we're going to have a new chemicals and waste panel being set up, as well as IRP and IPCC. And this will have an interest in this area, particularly the waste end. It's been driven essentially by concerns about plastics largely in the chemicals industry. And I've been involved with a few discussions about how to set it up. And I have to say, most of the discussions have been procedural about how you engage the business sector and how you manage conflict of interest when the business sector actually comes in. And it is a reminder, I think, that if we need data, it's the business sector that's going to generate it, and you need involvement. And if we just talk about, some of the actions that need to be taken to pursue a circular economy and resource efficiency, it needs many people across the business sector to do it, different parts of it. I mean, we can talk about reducing use of steel, but it's not the steel industry that decides how to reduce the use of steel. That's in a different part of the economy. So I think there are big challenges, actually, about the engagement of the business sector in this, because they are potential providers of data, but they also have significant stakes in how this actually moves. So I think the role of the corporate sector is one worthwhile bearing in mind quite strongly.
Yeah, definitely. And certainly in our work, we at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, we have a very large network of businesses that engage with us on circular economy, and they come right from across different sectors. And in some ways, I think it's easier for business to connect with their own sector because there are associations and organized systems for that. But actually finding partners across sectors is newer, and actually one of the beneficial areas, particularly if you're talking about circular economy. Did you want to come in on that? No. Yanis, I wanted to throw a question to you, because Jim alluded earlier to the fact that you were doing some study on the energy sector and CRMs and the importance of often to cross bridges again. The energy transition is talked about a bit as a self-standing piece, but circular economy is actually highly relevant to the energy transition. What is the report that he referred to, and what are some of the key findings that are coming out of that?
It will be actually a co-chair's think piece, which will be addressing the issue of material needs in the context of energy transition. And we all know the data, which are that on the side of energy supply, there will be, according to EIA, if I remember well, something like 4 times additional needs comparing to the current existing, but on the demand side, conventional electric car has approximately 10 times of those materials more embedded than actually a conventional car. So it is obviously a huge challenge. And currently, the approach of the countries, it's pretty much to look how to guarantee that we will get those critical raw materials, how to spread the supply, and when opening the new mines, how to organize that these are respecting the high environmental standards, and that more of the value which is created is basically staying in the countries which are the producers, which all it's very important. They are also talking about the importance of the circularity measures, but when they talk about circularity measures, to be honest, they basically talk about recycling. But critical raw materials are critical because the demand is growing and because the gaps exist. And where the demand is growing, like here, then you can't count a lot on recycling potential in the short term. So what will be our contribution? It's exactly that. Why do we not look in the first place? How can we reorganize our most resource-intensive systems like mobility, housing, and so on, and via that actually limit the needs for energy, and via that also the new needs for critical raw materials, because we simply don't see another avenue. So when we talk about critical raw materials, we normally address that from the point of view of economic dimension. But, when we talk about decoupling, also in this context, when we're discussing the material efficiency today, when we talk about decoupling, we basically talk about the need to address all materials and manage them in a more responsible way. Because at the end of the day, we need to make sure that this energy transition and materials related to that would be synchronized and would be aligned with our efforts to bring the world in a situation that we will be respecting planetary boundaries and living in safe operating space. We simply can't do any of those processes out of that logic. So that will be basically the thinking which we will do. And just last point, listening to everything what we are discussing today, and I think it's an important point because we are not mentioning it. It's, the Club of Rome recent modeling included in the Earth for All, it's coming to a very interesting conclusion that social tipping points will be actually reached before environmental tipping points. So everything what we are talking about today needs to be considered also through this social dimension and through this equity dimension, because if we simply not work simultaneously also on the social and equity issues, we will simply not create conditions that this environmental transition would be something which would be acceptable for population.
Thank you. I hadn't planned to ask you that question, but as soon as you mentioned it, I thought we should touch on it, because occasionally I'm asked, why bring circular economy into the climate space when we still have so much to do on the energy transition? And I think it's really important to remember that these two approaches are not in competition with each other. They are actually highly complementary. The circular economy will tackle additional sources of emission, and actually has the potential to support resilience as well, because it's a design question. So as we're redesigning, we can build resilience, and at the same time, it's going to make the energy transition more resilient. Go ahead, Yannis.
It will actually, just one sentence, it will actually make energy transition easier and possible.
Exactly.
And it will actually make us possibility that we avoid some of the difficult questions which are costly and also polarizing today, like carbon capture and sequestration, like use of biomass for energy purposes, like deep sea mining, if you want. Because otherwise those questions will be on the table if we will not take all the opportunities which we have also on the demand side.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So I'm delighted you're doing a think piece on that. We're sort of slowly coming to a close. Your last point about social tipping points is also really important. I think it's a point probably for all of us. You were mentioning actually the importance of social tipping points, Adalberto. both in the waste management sector, with the waste pickers is an important category for you. I don't know if you've also, sort of in the work of the national strategy, you mentioned you were bringing in lots of different social groups into that work, and that's from across different sectors, is it?
Yes, well, Brazil, since the election of President Lula, we are trying to re-engage with all the sectors again. So we created these boards and national councils where everybody's there. Even right now, as we speak, for example, Marina Silva is together with the civil society now meeting. The thing is that for Brazil, that we face a lot of social problems yet. We have poverty, we have a social desiguity. So most of these debates on climate, on energy, for us are also great opportunities. See the case of the energy sector. Brazil already have more than 90% of clean energy grid. Okay, we have been an energy clean matrix from a long time. But just in the last 4 years, we went from 1% to 13% of our grid with solar. We became the 4th largest solar photovoltaic market in the world. This helped to create more than 1.2 million jobs in Brazil. So doing energy efficiency, clean energy, debating the transformation of our transportation mobility systems, all of them have a great social impact. Mobility, for example, in the case of Brazil, Brazil has been a leader in the past on creating sustainable solutions for public transportation. We all know about the bus rapid transits, the bus that were created in Curitiba, later Bogotá expanded. And I remember during my master's at University of São Paulo, we studied a lot the transportation systems in São Paulo. And after you did all the really cheap investments to prioritize buses. I'm not even talking about the big bus rapid transit. Just like painting lines and getting priority. Like in 1 year, we were able to increase 20-25% the speed of the buses. People that used to take 2 hours to come from the east of the city to downtown, they are coming in 1 hour. So imagine the social impact that you have in giving one more extra hour per day to a worker family to take care of their kids. The benefits for the cost of the system, if you have 20%, 25% faster on the speed of the bus. You need less buses, less fuel to move the same amount of people. In case of São Paulo, we move 10 million people on buses every day. But at the same time, when we measure, we are reducing our greenhouse gas impact because we are using less energy. So creating more efficient system. And I liked when Jim brought the avoid, shift, and improve approach because I think that's the way that all of us really want to move. And of course, we had this difficult period during COVID, but it also taught us that it's possible to do a lot of things without traveling so much. Yeah. You know, so in Brazil, at least, well, maybe in other places was more common, but work from your home, it was never an option in Brazil. Nobody. I was for 10 years on the private sector, and before I was 10 years with the C40, which is a network of cities, you know, fighting climate change. And we used to travel everywhere just to have meetings. You know, we would get an airplane, go to Brasilia to have a meeting with the Minister of Environment. Nowadays, I'm in Brasilia, and I have hundreds of meetings with hundreds of mayors every day. So we are learning how to avoid some trips. We know how to shift some trips or, you know, the consumption of some goods to more efficiency group. But I think also the last part of it, which is improve, getting more efficiency. And in our case, we believe the solution has a lot of technologies. It has biofuel, it has electrical vehicle, but we're going to have to touch the problem of fossil fuels. There's no way for us to get where we want and continue using fossil fuels. Inside the government, we have some interesting debates. Minister of Environment with Minister of Energy, you know, the future of oil, where should we put our investments on, and solar, wind, green hydrogen, or oil. But then when you see the 20 largest producers of oil in the world now, they all talk about energy transition. I don't know if you went through Saudi Arabia booth here. You know, it's it's only like pictures and videos of solar and wind and green hydrogen and carbon storage and hydrogen engines. Everybody's talking about it. But when you look at the investment plans of the oil companies, they're going to double in the next years, the production. So something is wrong. Like, if we have to reduce fossil fuels, we have to stop using and not doubling our production. So, and this impacts a lot in our cities. In the case of Brazil, the air quality, which for many years improved a lot, while we were improving the engine efficiency, the standards for emissions, but it has been many years that we stabilized, and now air pollution is increasing again. Because people are leaving sometimes the car, but not coming to the bus. They're coming to motorbikes. You know, people are leaving buses and going to apps for shared mobility, but at the end it's one car for one person. So I'm not sure that we all got understanding on how hard the situation is, and that to really get where we need to arrive in a couple of years to reduce, I don't know, 40, 50% emission by 2030, so that we have a little chance to, you know, to get to where we need to be in 2050, that people will have to change their consumption patterns.
Yeah.
And I don't feel that we were able yet to make the case for society and for public opinion on how much the changes have to be done by ourselves. But at least we know that the problem is there. We have the science here telling us. And hopefully we'll be able to translate that in real action that can be really implemented on the ground.
Great. Thank you. Somewhere I wrote down the list of things that you were going to collaborate with Yannick on. I can't find it in my notes. So we have one list of collaboration there. We have some social engagement, but also I think part of the consumption piece is actually getting the production piece to change first, because we do respond to what's put in front of us. And I think in that final input you were sharing actually very nicely the bridge between the design question of how do you look at mobility. It's not just a question of cars, there are other things. And of course it all links back to the fuel source in the case of mobility as well. So all of these things are really deeply interconnected. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for the work that you're all doing on the toolbox and on the scientific side, and for sharing some of it. For us at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, it's all about the transition to the circular economy. I am absolutely thrilled that at this COP there have been many more discussions about it across the Blue Zone. I think it is also appearing in some of the ministerial discussions. I've certainly heard the words. It's not been possible to interrogate people about what they mean with those words, but hopefully what they're talking about is eliminating waste and pollution, circulating products and materials, and regenerating nature as the three principles to integrate into everything. We have 2 years to go until we go to, well, new NDCs. We'll be in Brazil, so hopefully we can mainstream circular economy and put it comfortably together with the energy transition. And hopefully the collaboration on the scientific side will just deepen, and we'll get that data question richer and be able to keep working with it. So thank you very much, but it is not for me to close. So can I invite Minister Lemke to say a few final words, please?
Yes, thank you, Miranda, for your excellent moderation of this debate. And thank you all to our panelists for a really fruitful and practice and scientific-orientated debate. It was a pleasure to have this debate here, and it's really important for the negotiations on the COP here. We have enjoyed such an informative discussion. All that remains is for me to highlight my main takeaways from this event. I would like to link them to 3 points I made at the beginning of the event, closing the loop in this regard. Firstly, the science on the link between the climate crisis and global resource use is really clear, as Jim Skier and Janis Potočnik have pointed out. The work of the IRP and the IPCC is absolutely fundamental for us as policy makers. And it's great to see the convergence between the work of the two panels, and we stand ready to support the science community in strengthening these interlinkages. Secondly, the task to reflect this link in climate action is absolutely feasible. As we have heard from Cassie Flynn, there is a toolbox available for countries who would like to build circularity into their NDCs. And I would like to underline how important this is. Implementation and real change will only happen if we manage to include circular economy and resource efficiency in concrete climate contributions. Since the work on NDCs can be challenging for countries with limited capacities, the NDC partnership can complete the support package for countries to ensure a high level of ambition in the upcoming NDC update. And thirdly, and this is key for me, there is a lot of global leadership on linking circular economy and climate action. We do our best to make progress as well with our national circular economy strategy, with our efforts at G7, G20 and United Nations level. But there are also great examples from other global leaders like Brazil that we can work with and learn from. And because of that, I have to conclude to say thank you to all of you again and to say thank you for this debate. And we will looking forward.
Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP28 in Dubai. Ambitious, just together.